again. For those joining us for the first time, my name is Anna, and I am the resident philosopher at the AI Collective. I'm always very glad to be here with you, as you know, sparking the debate on the most pressing issues of AI, law, and society. For those who are joining us for the first time, the AI Collective is a global nonprofit community founded in San Francisco. It brings together over 100,000 members worldwide, amongst innovators, policymakers, scholars, and builders committed to fostering trust, openness, and human flourishing in the age of AI. And today we are starting a new track of conversations. So it's a very important day for us. And this new track of conversation is titled The Mind Under Control. This is a three-part online series conversation that we have created together with the Center for Neurotechnology and Law. The Center for Neurotechnology and Law is an international research hub based in London, looking at how neurotechnologies intersect with law and human rights. And if you're curious to explore more their work, you can check it out at their website. They have many interesting courses and programs and trainings. I really recommend you to check it out. neurotechlaw.com. Great. And I would like to invite you to the continuation of this conversation we are having today. So our next event will be in the 27th of April, and this is titled How AI and Neurotechnology Are Transforming the Workplace. You are all invited to register on Luma. So, in this series, we are really trying to unpack something very important to our society: how neurotechnologies and AI systems are starting to reshape things like privacy, autonomy, and fundamental rights in our everyday lives. And in this age where humans are bonding with machines, we are wondering who actually has power over human cognition today. Is it something restricted to human beings, or now it's also delegated to companies producing those AIs? So in this first session, we will be focusing on technologies like brain-computer interfaces, neural wearables, affective AI, and emotion recognition that are beginning to have access and also to interpret our mental states and emotions in ways that were unthinkable not long ago. So we are going to open up this series with very uncomfortable but also important questions, such as what happens to mental autonomy in this new context of AI? What happens to meaningful consent when people are able to consent and click on terms and conditions of use inside of these platforms? And where do we draw the line when it comes to monitoring or even influencing what happens inside of our minds? So that's what we will be discussing today. And for that, we have two wonderful speakers with me today. And I really apologize because I have to introduce them, but I had to summarize their CV a lot because they have tons of experience. And this is such an important moment to us to have those brilliant brains with us. So I will start with Dr. Mariki Bottas. Dr. Mariki Bottas is an internationally recognized legal scholar specializing in neurolaw, neuroethics, and data governance, with over 20 years of experience as a practicing attorney in health law and biotechnology. She's currently based at the Pastelli Neuroscience Lab, University of Texas in Austin, where she leads comparative legal research within the Bridge Project, that stands for Brain Research, International Data Governance and Exchange, focusing on the protection, sharing, and governance of brain data across jurisdictions in North America, Latin America, and Africa. And we also do have here with us today Dr. Andrea Lavazza, coming from Italy. So, Dr. Andrea is a moral philosopher with an international profile in neuroethics and the philosophy of cognitive neuroscience. He is an associate professor at Pegaso University in Naples, Italy, and adjunct professor of neuroethics at the universities of Milan and Pavia. His research focuses on the ethical challenges posed by neurotechnologies, including brain privacy, mental integrity, free will, and emerging issues such as cerebral organoids. And in order to extract the most of these brilliant brains today, I would like to give them the floor for 20 minutes presentation each. And after this, we open up to your participation, comments, and the Q&A. And I would like to start with Dr. Mariki Bottas. So, Dr. Bottas, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the kind words. I'm sharing my screen. Just tell me when you can see the full screen, and then I can start.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is an absolute passion topic of mine, which I love to discuss. I think it's one of the most important topics that we need to discuss in the face of new neurotechnologies. Who owns your mind in the face of neurotechnologies? We talk about privacy and mental autonomy. So just as you said, I'm from the University of Texas here in Austin. I work in the Bastilli Neuroscience Lab and specifically on the Bridge project, where we focus on brain data governance, and we analyze the data privacy laws of 96 countries across North and South America, Europe, and Africa. So that is my background, and that is the lens through which I will present this talk today. So I'm very happy to do this. So all these questions aren't really new. The most prominent question is, what if the most intimate parts of human life, such as attention, emotion, intention, vulnerability, became increasingly legible to data systems? This is the current question we're really struggling with today. But I'm using artworks. I'm a big art lover as well. And you can see through some of these selected artworks in my talk that people struggled with these questions way back before technologies was an issue. So it just gives you an indication of the value people placed on these inner thoughts, this inner sanctum. So this is a painting by René Magritte, The False Mirror, and I will use some other artworks during the course of my presentation as well. So through the lens of neurotechnology, why does this issue matter now? Because the short answer is neurotechnology is moving way beyond the lab very quickly. There are various aspects of these technologies that enter our daily lives from different angles. Brain-computer interfaces are fast advancing. Consumer neural wearables are proliferating on the market, and AI systems increasingly infer mental states from our behavior to our physiology. And I will stand still at these so-called inferential data quite a bit during my talk. So the question is no longer only can we measure brain data or any data that come from our nervous system, but the main question we need to grapple with is, what can we infer? What can we predict from this data? And I think the most important question is, how can we and should we influence people using this data? So where do we gather this data from? From a clinical perspective, we gather this data from implantable BCIs, adaptive deep brain stimulation, and neural monitoring and care and research, but that is a clinical setting. In consumer settings, we use EEG headsets and neurofeedback, meditation and attention wearables, and all sorts of applications that is so easily accessible on any smartphone to anybody with any real barriers to it. And then you have your AI mediated platforms, eye tracking and virtual reality, telemetry, behavioral and physiological interference, and mental state prediction at scale. This is the threat or the fear or the excitement, depending on how you look at it, that AI bring into the equation with existing neurotechnologies. So it is clear that neurotechnologies are much broader than just brain implants. From a public perspective, the mere mortal on the ground, imagines neurotechnologies only as implants, but neurotechnology spans clinical system, non-invasive interfaces, AI-mediated inferences, and closed-loop adaptive systems. Some of the most scalable risk may come from consumer and platform environments rather than the operating theater or very hard to come by neurotechnologies. We've seen almost the first wave of so-called neurotechnologies based on social media platforms that nudges us with so-called dark patterns into making certain decisions that guide our behavior in certain directions. So you can see it's a very, very broad spectrum we cover under so-called neurotechnologies. So the essence which I want to drive home today is that neurodata is not just another biomedical data set, considering where it comes from. And I will try to drill down into what exactly do I mean when I say this. So the most important or the easiest comparison to draw is with genetic data. It was the most recent type of data that we looked at when we try to apply privacy laws and ask all the difficult questions around it. But genetic data in comparison to neurodata are relatively stable. They do change based on lifestyle or epidemic influences, but they remain fairly stable. They don't change from minute to minute, or they take a long time to change. In comparison, neurodata is very dynamic. They have active patterns that is generated through the mind. So you can clearly see that the brain, from which most neurodata or the nervous system, all this data is generated from, is not just another organ. Neurodata usually discloses perception, memory, intention, emotion, and decision making. So let's have a closer look at three critical aspects that make so-called neurodata, as opposed to any other kind of health data, biometric data, genetic data, different. So the first point of difference for me is that it is processed data. Neural signals unfold in real time. Your neurodata, your brain data, differs between milliseconds or minutes. And these reactions is tightly coupled to your environment and to your internal goals. The stimuli you receive from your environment, and that coupled with your internal goals, makes whether you're frustrated or whether you feel like you achieve something based on the environment you act, has a direct influence on how you think, how you react, both mentally and physically sometimes. And that changes minute to minute to minute. So this interaction, this entire process of creating so-called neurodata, captures attention shifts, valuation, uncertainty, motor preparation, and a whole lot of emotional responses. So where biomedical data per se describes what you are, it measures what you are, neurodata, on the other hand, can describe what you are doing mentally right now. So this is one of the first aspects that differentiates neurodata. And as I've alluded to, neurodata is very context sensitive. It can never be interpreted in isolation. The meaning of neurodata depends on stimulus from your environment, the task you set yourself out to accomplish within that environment, your social setting and resources that you have to accomplish that environment, or the task you set out in that environment, and your internal goals. A very interesting study I came upon was done by the Hubbard Foundation, where they tested, or they tried to see which areas of the brain lighted up when you do daydreaming as opposed to meditation, active meditation, and that those areas were vastly different, just giving you an indication of how you cannot interpret neurodata in isolation, but your internal goals, the reason why you do something, the outside stimuli makes a huge difference. So the same neural patterns can mean different things across different contexts. And this is why metadata and behavioral context become so incredibly important when we talk about neurodata. And it is exactly this metadata and behavioral context that also makes it so very risky when it's combined with neurodata and amplified by artificial intelligence. So the third aspect of neurodata that differentiates it for me is it's representational. Neurodata, as we've seen with all the metadata and the behavioral data that we can gather from it, is very rich, rich enough to support inferences. And this is where the real issue becomes important. It's not just biomarkers like genetics. It potentially reveals what someone perceives, what they remember, what they value, and what they intend or not intend to do. So you can clearly see that we move from descriptive statistics to inferential statistics. But there's a huge caveat where all this clickbait headlines that you see in media is simply not true. We are not reading minds. We are making inferences. But these inferences coupled with AI is pixelating the picture so much that the inferential statistical or statistics we can draw for it really becomes important. So again, I reiterate, we are not reading minds, but we are building increasingly powerful statistically inferences. So today, realistic outputs with regards to this is we can already see attention and fatigue, stress, emotional arousal, motor intention, engagement with certain platforms, and cognitive or behavioral tendencies. This already happens back in the start of social media platforms with their nudges, etc., right up to neurotechnologies and wearables. This is happening today. So the risk tomorrow, the next decade, realistically speaking, these risks can increase through multimodal fusion, longitudinal data, AI model training, and cross-platform aggregation. It's very clear to see the more you pixelate the picture of someone, you build around them, the riskier that may become. So this painting by Fernand Knopf, I Lock My Door Upon Myself, was already painted in 1891, where he grappled with the idea of what do I keep to myself, the privacy that I only keep to myself and I don't want to disclose to the world. This is so relevant today where we move from privacy, what data do I keep to myself, what access I provide to other people, to mental autonomy. So there's a clear shift between privacy and mental autonomy. So the issues we grapple with is much more than ordinary privacy as we understood it a little while ago. Traditional privacy asks who can identify me, hence the de-identification, anonymization issues, and who can access my health data, hence the access control, etc. issues. Neurodata, as I just explained, raises much deeper questions than those. They ask what can be inferred about how I think. Can vulnerabilities be predicted? Can behavior be shaped or manipulated based on these predictions or inferences? And then the most important questions: who controls the model of my mind? So this whole question kind of brings anxious thoughts to my mind as depicted here by Edvard Munch, The Scream, in 1893. And as a lawyer, we had to look into data privacy laws to see what goes wrong in law today. All right, there's also a school of thought that still advocates that we have sufficient protections in law if we enforce them correctly. I'm of the school of thought that we definitely need some form of sui generis protection and definitely need an expanded definition of what we call neurodata and possibly an expanded definition of what we could call mind data to complete this entire picture. So, as I said, I work on the Bridge project here at the Pastille Lab, University of Texas. We analyze the data protection laws as well as the health laws and the clinical research laws of 96 countries across the 4 global regions I've mentioned. And we found that the law does protect certain aspects of neurodata, but it only does so by means of proxy. Current law, data protection law, usually treats neurodata as health data, biometric data, or what they call sensitive personal information, and research data by means of health legislation or clinical research legislation. But regardless of those classifications of types of data where you can slot certain aspects of neurodata into, depending on the context you use it, it misses the key features I just discussed: inferential depth, derivative forms, embeddings and models, sectoral migration, manipulation and profiling risks. And I'm not discussing inner cybersecurity laws here at the moment. That's a discussion for another day. So in short, what we found is that data, health data, neurodata to a certain extent, are protected procedurally, but it's completely misdescribed conceptually, and that poses a problem. So why does this matter for society today, and how do we need to keep in touch with what makes us human? This made me think about Las Dos Fridas by Frida Kahlo, the two Fridas. What do I need to keep in touch with to keep myself human? So we need to ask ourselves, what is at stake if we just simply ignore this or not doing anything about this? What is at stake is workplace cognitive monitoring, consumer manipulation and neuromarketing, which is already happening and proliferating at an exceedingly speed. Emotional surveillance. Do we really want to do that? Should we do that? If we can do it, should we do it? Behavioral profiling, similar to what we've seen in the Cambridge Analytica case. Vulnerable populations, and here I want to reiterate that vulnerable populations also shift from the understanding of vulnerable populations we have from a biomedical perspective. It's not just children, pregnant women, prisoners as described in the Declaration for Helsinki or the Belmont Report, for example, but every single one of us, regardless of your background, your education, becomes vulnerable at some stage, depending the context, when you use digital platforms. So all of us are vulnerable when it comes to digital platforms. And then cross-border exploitation of neurodata. So the big question for me is, what parts of human experience should remain beyond technological optimization? And I want to end off with this slide. As a lawyer, we ask ourselves what the governance response should be. What should governance aim for? And I came upon this painting by Stephen Dutton. He calls it the Unbalanced Scales, which he painted in 2011. And it kind of feels like neurodata, neuro law, technology governance with a sprinkle of AI is kind of in this process of time is of the essence and the scales are heavily unbalanced and we need to focus on what matters most. So according to what I've seen based on the research we've done here at the Bastille Lab is we need a balanced research enabling approach. And I want to focus this on the following. We need to protect our mental privacy. It feels like the last bastion of being human. We need to preserve our cognitive autonomy, and we need to recognize neurodata as a very distinct, conceptually distinct governance object. We need to regulate derivative and inferred forms for the explanations I just offered. We need to strengthen consent and downstream use controls. These downstream use controls are some of the so-called legal tools we develop here at the Bastille Law Lab, but that's a conversation for a different day. And we need to prevent manipulative or exploitative deployment of these technologies. Having said all of this, I'm also a firm believer that we need to enable responsible science and not shut it down. Come from a governance perspective, we can only truly regulate something fair and just if we really understand the science and technology behind it. Thank you very much for your time. I'd love to hear from you, to make contacts. We're very open for collaborations. There's my email address, marieke.boertes@austin.utexas.edu. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Bottas. It was an amazing presentation, and I loved your inspiration in artworks, masterpieces. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we have many people here reacting to your presentation. And before passing to Dr. Andrea Lavazza, I would just like to pose a quick question in order to warm up about the inferences, because I think that this is a topic that afterwards Dr. Lavazza will also work on. Well, I think that the problem of inferences is the biggest one now in our society, and we see this growing use of LLMs such as ChatGPT, Claude, and many other platforms that can infer many things about us. Last week, I was in London for a talk, and one of the objects of my talk was the feature of the memory, the persistent memory feature inside of those AIs. And it is shown by many studies that the persistent memory, and I'm not talking about conversation history, I'm talking about the persistent memory feature. This feature is capable of doing many types of inferences on someone's behavior. And I tested this in myself because I'm using LLMs as a researcher and also to improve the efficiency of my work. And I was trying on the inferences that I saw on ChatGPT. And what I realized is that it can produce new information on the user based on things that were talked with the machine. How do you see the regulation of these inferences, Dr. Bottas, and what is the importance of the memory feature inside of those LLMs to you? Because I have the impression, as far as I am researching for my PhD thesis as well, that the memory feature is what is creating this sense of relationality between the user and the machine. The fact that I am talking to ChatGPT and it's remembering stuff about me, it is stating these things during the conversation, and people can feel heard and understood through
Mhm.
this mechanism. So, how do you see that evolving?
It is an amazing question. Thank you very much. And I have a couple of thoughts around that. What is problematic to me is if you interact with ChatGPT or chatbots in the mental health or wellness sphere, with chatbots, we know about the suicides and the self-harm attempts brought about by chatbots in the mental health, is you kind of start believing this chatbot or ChatGPT about certain aspects of yourself. You kind of carry it with you. And I mean, that is one of the big reasons why we need cognitive autonomy. You can change your character, your habits, your thinking, etc. You're not bound by this. A very interesting experience I had for myself, for example, is my teenage son is logged into the same chat GPT platform as I am. So we're on the same account, but we're completely different people, research completely different fields. And if you talk about the memory of ChatGPT, is ChatGPT mixes up, if I ask him or it for certain stuff, it mixes up our two personalities tremendously. So this just gives you an indication of the flaws that come into play with so-called memory. It cannot distinguish between you as a person as opposed to you as another person. It remains something that learns from what you feed it. How to govern this? I think there's lots of technological tools out there that could help in us to govern this, but we still need to understand a whole lot to write in governance mechanisms or write policies where you do not stifle the research into proper understanding of this, to allow this and allow the development, because technologies develop so quickly over time that you don't know what the inference may be within the next 5 to 10 years and still protect people. Having said that, governance is not the end all. There's a whole lot of aware making, advocacy that needs to be done, so-called digital literacy, if you want to call it that. But it's a whole lot of ground floor public engagement that needs to happen to make people aware of this. They're simply not aware. Thank you.
Yes, I totally agree. And just one more question from the audience before we move on with Dr. Lavazza. A question from Yevgen. Dr. Mariki, fascinating highlights. What are the topics of research you saw in the area of these topics and cognition and psychology?
I think this is exactly what Professor Lavaza will speak to. Cognition and psychology is exactly behavioral manipulation. I think one of the biggest areas currently is the whole debate around chatbots and the influence of that on people's psychology and behavior. Because a lot of people, because it's low resource, it's easily accessible, turn towards chatbots for psychological help. And those are often not regulated because it's not regulated as a medical device. It is very accessible as an application on a telephone. It is not necessarily certified as having the correct scientific basis. So that is something from a policy perspective that we really need to look in very quickly, how to certify those, how to regulate those. And I think that is the most prominent threat at the moment. The easy accessibility of these things and the effect of them on people, normal people like you and me, and the fact that it's not regulated at all. But I think Professor Lavaza, that's exactly within his toolkit to discuss further. Thank you.
So, yes, thank you very much. This is the perfect moment to move on. So, Professor Lavaza, the floor is yours, and I will ask everyone to mute their mics so that we don't have interferences along his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on the audience time zone. Thank you for this kind invitation. I'm grateful to the organizer, and thank you for your very kind introduction. So let me start by briefly connecting with what we have just heard. And in the meantime, I'm trying to share my screen. Unfortunately, my slides are not as fascinating or as awesome as those by Dr. Boots. And so I'm sorry for that. Can you see them now?
No, not yet.
Not yet. I'm sorry. Okay. They are just placeholders, so it's not so important that you can see them. I just do another attempt.
No problem. We have time, and indeed, you have to close the
Okay.
presentation and open it again so that it works.
Okay. Okay. It's strange. I need to close them and open them again as before. Just a moment. Sorry
In
for
the
that.
meanwhile, to the audience, you can keep posting your questions here. I will select them and ask them to our speakers afterwards when Professor Lavaza will be finished with his presentation. And stay with us because I will also give you the opportunity to ask directly to our speakers on the mic. So stay with us because we are going to open for the Q&A soon.
Okay. My last attempt. I do not know. Okay, I can start without slides. As said, they are not so fascinating. So the previous talk by Dr. Bortes has shown very, very clearly that neuro data are not simply another type of personal data. They are dynamic, context sensitive, and deeply connected to our mental life. So what I would like to do in the next 15, 20 minutes is to shift slightly the perspective and ask a more explicitly philosophical question. Not too philosophical, but something like that. Why do new technologies in general and neurotechnologies in particular raise such profound concerns in the first place? So this is our guiding question. And more specifically, when technologies begin to access, interpret, or even respond to our mental state, what exactly is at stake? So, um, the answer, in my view, uh, can be that AI and neurotechnologies specifically cross what we might call the last boundary of human privacy. So the idea is that privacy has always been layered. We know at the first level, there is what we could call behavioral privacy. What we do, where we go, how we act in our environment. So this is a first type of privacy, the classical type, so to say. A second level is about informational privacy. The data we generate often through our interactions with digital system, and sometimes we are not aware of how many data we share with the platforms. But beyond these types of privacy, there has always been something more protected, our inner mental life. It's exactly what Dr. Bodes has discussed before. It's about our thoughts, intentions, emotions, inner speech. These have historically been considered inaccessible from the outside. It was something we were sure of. And this is why freedom of thought has always been treated as an absolute freedom, in a way. Even in situations where all other freedoms were limited, the inner space of thought was assumed to remain beyond reach in every context. But now, for the first time, which is the main point of our event, I think, this assumption is no longer entirely secure. New technologies in particular, as said, but even AI, as we have just considered, especially when when combined one with another, are increasingly able to access the neural correlates of mental states and infer their content. As we have just said, inference is a key word, a key concept in our conversation. But I think we need to be careful here. We are not reading minds in a literal sense, as Dr. Bortes said, rightly, obviously. We are not accessing the full richness of our subjective experience. There remains a crucial dimension, the so-called qualitative, subjective aspect of our experience, what philosophers call qualia. Qualia is a quite complex word. It's not important to delve into technicalities of it, but it is something still beyond technological access so far, in my view, and probably it might remain so for a very long time. So, and this is probably the key point. We do not need perfect access to something in order to transform its ethical and social status. Even partial, probabilistic, and context-dependent access is enough. So we are moving, in a way, from a world where thoughts are effectively inaccessible to a world when they are increasingly inferable. So inference is the key. And that shift is already enough to change the use of the game. So we need probably new rules, as said, and what is at stake is a constellation of values. So let me briefly consider some concepts which are at stake in this new scenario. Mental privacy is probably the first one. We know that neurotechnology can potentially access information that individuals have never expressed externally, thoughts, desires, intentions. And this is fundamentally different from traditional data privacy, as we have seen. So it's about what we have never chosen to reveal. And this gives mental privacy a special status, in my perspective, because it concerns what we might call the ultimate reserve of the self. As said before, the boundary of our inner core of our self in general. And secondly, autonomy is at stake. When we consider autonomy, we know that it requires that our decisions are formed through processes that are not externally manipulated. And we know that technologies now can detect emotional states, identify moments of vulnerability, and also intervene at those moments. So autonomy is no longer just internal, it becomes something that can be shaped from the outside. And thirdly, personal identity. We know it is not a simple set of stable traits. This is a traditional view, maybe a view that lay people can have, but we know that it is not the right view. Our identity is a narrative construction built over time from a first-person perspective. Now, we can imagine a situation in which external systems continuously model our preferences, predict our behavior, classify our personality. And these models are not passive, are not just tools in order to measure something. They can influence us, and in particular, they can influence what we are shown, what opportunities we are offered, and how others perceive us. And in this way, they may also influence how we perceive ourselves. And so identity becomes at least partially co-produced, not something we can autonomously build, but something which is at stake in a new way. Obviously, our identity is in a way influenced by the environments, by other people, by culture, education, obviously, but this new scenario is something different. And now we can consider free will as our moderator Anna has invited us. We know free will is a notoriously difficult concept to define. We have many definitions of free will in philosophy, but we have a general idea and intuition. We think we are free. This is the default position for all of us in general. In order to have a more precise idea of free will, we can identify three conditions that are widely accepted in philosophy. The first one is the ability to do otherwise. We need to have at least two courses of action in order to be free. And then the second condition is the control over one's action. Our agency needs to be real. And finally, responsiveness to reasons means that we need to make decisions based on something rational, not just tossing a coin, for example. These conditions are obviously not always perfectly realized in everyday life, but give us a working notion of what it means to act freely. We know that we had a traditional challenge to free will and the history of philosophy, that is determinism, the general idea that the world is determined by laws that do not have exceptions, and so the physical world is determined in that way. But now we can see a shift in the issue of free will. What is new today, probably, is not only the neuroscientific perspective, but the emergence of large-scale prediction through AI, as said before. Neuroscience challenges free will in that we now know that probably, it's not completely sure, but probably our brain starts decisions or movements before we are conscious of that. But this is what neuroscience can say concerning the individual conception of free will, so to say. Now, what we see is that the emergence of large-scale prediction through AI can change the entire scenario for free will. The question is, are our actions predictable, and by whom? This is a crucial shift in my view, because predictability introduces a relational dimension that was largely absent for classical debates. So, in a way, freedom becomes a relational concept in a new way. Obviously, we are still capable of reflecting our reasons, revising our intentions, and exercising a certain degree of control. But we need to face a powerful asymmetry of prediction today. We know that new agents, AI agents in particular, can anticipate our decisions, influence the options available to us, and intervene at moments of maximum susceptibility, vulnerability, as said before. And this creates what we might call an asymmetry of epistemic and practical power. One party knows more about our future behavior than we do ourselves. This is something astonishing in a way, but it's reality now. And those agents can use this knowledge to shape outcomes concerning us. And so we can easily go from prediction to influence. Agents can predict what we are likely to do. They can design an environment that makes the outcome more likely. And this is already visible in targeted advertising, as you know, in recommendation systems and in behavioral nudging. So we cannot delve into those procedures, but probably you know them well. And so neurotechnologies and new technologies in general advance this influence, and these influences may become even more direct because they can be based on signals related to attention, emotion, or intention. And we know that new technologies can detect them very well. So I think I need to go to finish. And so I'd like to uh, introduce as the title. Actually, you didn't see the title in the slides, but the title was about concerns and opportunities concerning new technologies. So I'd like to very briefly introduce a balanced perspective. Obviously, we have risk, but we can also have opportunities. And so I'd like to defend the right to access neurotechnologies as well. Now, we know that neurotechnologies can restore communication in patients, allow interaction with the environment for people who are otherwise locked in, treat neurological psychiatric conditions, and potentially enhance cognitive and emotional capacity. So, even for healthy people, we can have some benefits from neurotechnologies. Obviously, we need to implement rights, as Dr. Botas rightly claimed, the right not to be manipulated, the right to mental privacy, the right to mental integrity. But I think we also need to have a right to access neurotechnologies in the proper way. Um, with some rules in place, with some control. But we need to respect the freedom of people. We need to try to defend justice and equality. We know that if access to neurotechnologies is limited to a small group, for example, those who can afford them, this could create new and significant forms of inequality. We could see the emergence of cognitively enhanced individuals or new groups capable of using these new technologies for bad aims. So we need a balance, with a difficult balance. And my conclusion is that technology is never neutral. Um, Technology forces us to rethink what it means to be autonomous, what it means to have a private inner life, what it means to be the author of one's identity. And so the question, who holds our mind, can be slightly changed. And the challenge in front of us, in my view, is not to stop these technologies at all, but to ensure that even in a world that increasingly read and shape our minds, this is the reality, we do not lose the ability to think, to choose, and to become who we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lavazza. It was a great talk. Really enlightened our balance at the end because those technologies are also to be seen as beneficial for some people. So we should be mindful of that as well. Those represent innovation for the benefit of human flourishing as well. So finding this balance is one of the most important things. Before moving to the audience questions, I would like to pose a question to you as well. Because something that intrigues me the most when we talk about neural data or neurotechnologies is the subject of free will. How are we supposed to deem ourselves free in a world that knows better than us? We have an entity now that is called artificial intelligence, representing epistemic and moral authority in our world, because people are asking and receiving recommendations out of those systems in a way that their behavior and emotions are being steered, directed every day towards aims that those people have. And AI knows a lot more and better than those people based on the inferences that it can make. So, what would moral philosophy have to say about that to us, Professor Lavazza? Are we still living in a world where we can really have freedom of agency? Because as far as it seems, AI is creating identities to us as well. For instance, we just mentioned the LLM systems, able to infer many things about people through long hours and conversations in a way that there is a digital narrative that is created inside of these systems about who the user is. What is his inner life, as you have mentioned? And this can be very difficult to grasp and even to really get rid of, because you start seeing yourself through the lenses of the AI as well at a certain point, through what it says that you are. And there is a conception, a narrative of the identity of the user being shaped by those systems. So, in this scenario, do you think that, according to moral philosophy, we can say that we still have freedom of agency?
Thank you for this very, very difficult question. In the first place, I think it depends on how much time we share with AI system. But it's possible that in the future, when AI devices will be a sort of prosthesis of us, this issue will be more pressing. In general, I think that the risk is real. We know that even Pope Leo has called AI an oracle, something which can seems to be in control of everything, capable of answering all our questions. And so this fascination, this impression can lead us to resort to AI for every matter in our life. In this sense, our freedom can be limited in a way, because we are not resorting to our own reasons for deciding, for conducting our life. So, in this sense, I agree that the risk exists, but probably we need to try a new balance, as said before, by considering AI a helpful support, and not just the last word for our existential questions in particular. It's not easy, but I think that this effect cannot last forever. We know we easily get used to everything. So my hope is that we can get used to AI as a tool and not just an oracle.
Yes, it depends again on what Dr. Bottas mentioned before, the AI literacy training, the understanding, the empowerment of the individual, right? this use, yeah, the Oracle use or the, let's say, more autonomous use that we can make. In any case, I would like to open the mic for our participants here. So you will see that there is a button now titled Ask a Question. You can click on the button and start a queue to ask directly on the mic to our speakers or to comment on something that you have heard in this event. And we have someone there, Jonathan. Hello, Jonathan. How are you today? Jonathan, are
Can
you
you hear
here
me?
with us? Yes.
Hi, sorry. Sorry if there's noise in the background. There's music from that cafe. I was just wondering about neural data specifically and whether you have concerns surrounding the trade and sale of this kind of data. I know people talk about the risks around it, but I'm wondering if there are specific case studies that you know or particular regions of the world where you're particularly worried, considering that risk is one thing, but actually having this happening is another. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. We are just waiting for Dr. Bottas to rejoin us because she had a connection issue. So let me just see if she's able to join us. Okay, there she is.
Sorry, I just disappeared. Can
Great.
I just, I'm so sorry, Jonathan. You asked something about the commercialization risks, which has been talked about a lot. Can you just rephrase the question so I get the nuance right, please?
Yeah, so I guess my question is mostly about the difference between things having being a risk in theory of the sale and trade of neural data versus actually happening. And I'm wondering
Mhm.
if you know of anything actually happening, because regulatory bodies are preventive and that's great. But I'm just wondering if we're responding to something specific or if we're just being taking precautions.
Well, the current sale of data, which is happening under the auspices of intellectual property. So if you build your own data set, you inferential data is pretty much research data, right? So in the research context, so you need to separate the research context from the commercial context. In the research context, those data sets are much more protected because it goes to an ethical board, et cetera, et cetera. But a more commercial route is the consumer wearables, the neurotech that you buy over the counter or whatever the case may be. And those terms and conditions, so to speak, falls back on consent, informed consent when you buy the product and you use the product or you enter the platform, you've got to click on the privacy conditions, the consent form to use the platform, and nobody reads those. So in those terms and conditions, you say that this may be sold on to third parties or whatever the case may be, and that's highly under-regulated. It could be regulated in terms of plain contract law, consumer protection laws, stuff like that, but it's not regulated from a data privacy perspective necessarily, and it's not regulated to protect all the issues that we discussed here. So most companies, most private entities say that we created this data set, we have intellectual property around this, we protect it by trade secrets, so we are going to sell it forward and we protect ourselves by means of an informed consent form, which nobody reads. So there's transparency issues, there is not quite very honesty issues when it comes to what you do and cannot do with data. And I think we need to step back and see what is being done, where are all the loopholes with regards to all of this, especially in countries like the United States, where there isn't a federal law that governs data protection, for example. There are states that do amazing work, Colorado, California, etc. But we need to fill those gaps to see where those conversations are ongoing, but it hasn't resulted in definitive policy yet. So it's a real minefield at the moment. Thank you for the question.
Great. Do we have anyone else that would like to ask a question to our speakers? Please feel free to join on the queue there. You can click on the button, ask a question, or you can write your question down on the comments. So Caesar is asking a privacy-related question here on the chat. What about HR departments accessing this type of data, neural data? We know that there are some companies already producing devices in order to help performance activities. I know that there is a company called Emotif in the US that they are producing helmets and sensors that can be utilized by workers, for instance. How do you see that evolving in the US, Dr. Bottas? And then I will also ask Dr. Lavazza, how does he see the freedom of choice and agency in the workplace when we use those types of technologies?
There was a huge case that involved the emotive technology in, I think it was Chile or Uruguay. I can't remember the exact country, but there was a huge case where it concluded that it did breach data privacy regulations. The thing is with those, from the GDPR's perspective, most data privacy laws are based or modeled on the GDPR as little as they want to acknowledge it sometimes, is you need to use only as much data as is necessary to perform your task. It's the whole principle of data minimalization. And then you need to have consent as well to use this data, especially in an HR setup. So if you collect data that is not directly related to the purpose for progressing your company or your business forward, it is an overreach of data collection. There are, for example, in China, a lot of tracking devices that they use in long haul transportation or in big companies. They also function on a very different type of regulatory framework as opposed to the US, as opposed to the EU, as opposed to Africa. But I think the main principle here is data minimization, which is to be found in almost all data protection laws that we've investigated. You cannot collect more than is necessary to fulfill your purpose. And that's context specific with regards to the company that you work in.
But in any case, I suppose that it's very difficult to make the data protected in a company and to have the employee assured that this will never be accessed for harmful purposes, such as dismissals and, let's say, downgrading people or not allowing them to progress in their careers based on this data. How do you see that question, Dr. Lavazza, when it comes to people in the work setting using those devices?
Yeah, this is a very important issue. I know well, obviously, the Italian situation, and it's curious what's happening in Italy. We have very strict rules in the workplace, so companies cannot impose anything to workers. And so, in this sense, brain data are perfectly protected. But what's happening is that executives, high profile people in companies, are volunteering for experiments with new devices in order to improve their performances. And so they sign voluntary informed consent forms to share their data without protection because they think that these new devices are very important. And so there is an indirect pressure from companies to their executives or managers in order to resort to new brain devices, and people are volunteering for that based on this pressure. You know, if you are not prepared to use them, probably your career would be damaged, and so this is what's happening now.
Yeah, a very interesting scenario, and it surely varies according to the jurisdiction. There is a question about this here on the chat by Jesse Bray. The question is, do other countries compare closer to America or California with rules and regulations? What are your thoughts on this worldly AI race? Maybe you both can take on this.
What we've experienced, the most advanced country when it comes to AI and privacy law regulations, obviously the EU with their Brussels effect, and a lot of African countries follow the GDPR model, so to speak, as they do in Latin America as well. One of the most progressive countries when it comes to neurodata protection is Chile, because they changed their constitution in 2021 to include that 5-aspect neuro rights protection. They are in the business or in the process of rolling that out into legislation to flesh that out. But in California and Colorado, they have state level legislation that makes provision for what we call neurodata or related data privacy protections. We haven't seen that type of drilling down into detail in other countries. In the European Union, which is kind of the forerunner of regulation development, we've seen a lot of debates around that and a lot of guidelines coming out of the EU, but not changes to legislation per se at the moment. But they are busy changing or overhauling all their data governance legislation, so to speak, with a new omnibus, which are in the pipeline. And we need to see what's coming out of that, because there are a lot of debate and discussion about what do they need to do with personal data, how it's defined, how the AI Act and the risk tier is going to fit into that. So it's a bit in flux at the moment to see what the EU will be doing with that. And that will obviously impact issues such as the data protection framework between the US and the EU. And it's going to have a ripple effect. But at the moment, it's so uncertain still that we're watching it closely and to see what's going on there.
May I add just a little thing? Okay. Obviously, Dr. Bose has very well explained the global scenario. EU AI Act is a very good law, but my impression is that we are always trying to catch something which cannot be caught because the technological progress is so fast-paced that we cannot devise proper rules in order to cope with it. And for example, the EU AI Act has been released and applied just in the moment when LLMs have been released for the public, and so there has been a displacement, so to say, of the rules in the face of new tools available. So the point is the law is structurally slower than companies and labs, and so this gap is probably the most relevant issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed. I see that Yevgen is there on the queue, but I would just ask you, Yevgen, 1 minute because I have something that I need to ask them now before I forget. And it comes to this answer you just gave us, Dr. Lavazza. Well, I would just like to add first that in California, we had interesting laws about AI companions, which in my research and thesis, I defend that those AI companions are also collecting neural data. It's not directly collected from the brain, but there is a type of mind data that is being collected there. So I would like to mention that. And secondly, I would like to come back to this point of the AUAI Act in the AU. The AUAI Act has a very interesting article, the Article 5, that is mentioning manipulation, if you remember well. And this is what my question is about. According to the AUAI Act, all the platforms that are using techniques in order to manipulate the user, and there they state as an example subliminal techniques, for instance, those platforms that are doing this must be banned from the AU. That is what the Article 5 is saying. And afterwards, there was a set of guidelines that were published by the European Commission in order to help us to interpret this article. And even if it was helpful at some level, it turned the interpretation more complicated because they included more examples. And there is also a consideration on nudge and dark patterns and many other things that are approached and that can be encompassed by the manipulation concept. How do you see, this is my question, these technologies manipulating people, and where can we draw the line between agency and manipulation, according to you?
Andrea, would you want to give it a shot?
Please.
Okay. This is very difficult, and it's a debate we have a lot, because manipulation is a thing that people do with one another on a daily basis in daily conversations. So it's almost a form of communication as opposed to a form of malicious intent. But we have seen, if you scale that up and you add AI to the whole concept, it can explode into something more serious. You can manipulate and overthrow elections, etc., etc. So what exactly is manipulation is a very hard definition to gather. I think you need to bring in what the intent is with what you want to manipulate or guide someone with. Whether you can ever stop platforms gathering information or data that will not be able to be used to manipulate people, I don't think you will ever be able to do that, because as human beings, we collect that information in any event. And you can use any information at any point in time against someone or to their harm or to manipulate them. So I think it's a question of what the end goal and the intention is and the purpose of the use of the data, as opposed to what data is collected and whether it's collected. And then obviously transparency. People need to go into well knowing what is collected, what could be used, what cannot be used. It reminds me of we were putting together a definition for neurodata, and it's just as difficult. What exactly is it? It's hard, and to speak to the point of Professor Lavaza, it's hard to fathom what new technologies could be doing in future. So yeah, it's such a beautiful place to live in now, because everything is on flux, but it's so scary because you don't know. But it's so important to have these conversations out in the open, to talk about these things.
Yeah, I completely agree that manipulation is a very elusive concept, and it's very difficult to be defined. Probably at the philosophical level, it's impossible to reach a consensus about what manipulation is. But legislators have a good chance to give some stipulation that they can define precisely manipulation in a specific way, whatever. But in this sense, the law has an advantage, because they can try to put down a precise definition, and people must comply with it. But that EU AI Act didn't do that because, as you said before, it is a very long law. It's a book. It's something too complex to be a clear guidance, and we need judges in order to interpret, to apply these rules. But we are in the early stage of application, as you know, so we can hope that after a couple of years or more time, maybe we can have a new form of application, a new way in which all the actors, all the people involved in this field can try to converge in
Yes.
hopefully.
Hopefully. I hope so. And I hope that it won't be in many, many years because as lawyers and people working on the legal profession, we need guidance to apply the law. So this is something that we want to see produced in society soon. In any case, in the benefit of time, because we are almost 1 hour 30 here of duration, so I would like to give the opportunity to Yevgen, and this will be our final and last question, and then we will go to our closing remarks and goodbyes. So Yevgen, are you still there with us? Hello? Yes, but he cannot unmute. So I will put you in the audience again, and you asked the okay, I moved you to the audience. Now you go to the button and ask a question. It will be probably unmuted. It will be muted. Please tell me if it works. Yeah, or you can just write down on the chat, indeed. But it would be funnier, of course, if you could ask live on the mic. So it seems like it's not working. In any case, we have many comments on the chat thanking you both for your great presentations and contributions here today. And
Thank you.
yes, I would like to thank you very much for spending your time here with us today in a very fruitful and productive way. And I wish that we can cross paths again. I would like to give you both 2 minutes just for your closing remarks.
Right. Thank you very much. It's always such a pleasure to talk about things that lie close to my heart, which I feel passionate about. And I think one of the most important things, there's so many ambiguities, there's so many uncertainties, there's so many changes in the future, is that we need to talk about this. And we need to talk to one another interdisciplinary. Lawyers need to talk to technologists, to software developers, to scientists. I have the absolute pleasure of being the only lawyer in a neuroscience lab, so I just listen like a sponge. So we need to talk cross-disciplinary. That for me is critical to understand exactly what we want to regulate, to make sure that we regulate it properly and not stifle research and innovation. So I want to leave people with this thought: just be open, communicate, voice your opinion with everyone. And thank you for this platform. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you for this occasion. It was a pleasure, and just a word concerning the role of ethics in all of this. Many people think that ethics should be embedded in a way in the first place where technologies are produced, are researched. My view is slightly different. I think ethics sometimes, maybe often, should be in a way adversarial. We do not need to try to make ethicists work with technologists or scientists or companies, but we need ethicists as people coming to see and say what they do not agree with, or what issues they see in what is going on in the lab, for example, or in companies. And so this view can be seen as a not perfectly smooth or not so welcomed, but I think we need sometimes ethicists as people saying no, or saying you should change something. So this is my last message.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. So, thank you to the audience. Yes, our speakers. It was a great event. See you next time. Have a great evening. Have a great day. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.